All right. So I just want to thank everyone for joining today. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We've got Alton, who's in the chat and helping do some of the administration that'll help facilitate the chat. So if you do have any comments that you want to add, Alton will be there to help shepherd those conversations into our session here today. I'm Luke Stanky. I will be sort of our host for the day, but really we have a series of smaller presentations, bite-sized, by 6 individuals who've either spent time at Tableau as an employee. All of us have worked with Tableau or have been consultants for the product itself. And we're here today to speak a little bit about why we've moved from Tableau to Sigma in our careers and speak to some of the amazing benefits that Sigma has to offer. As we get started here, I do want to give just an overview of our panelists, if you will. I'm also supposed to say that there is a gift card that's involved, or there's some drawings that are coming out of this, so stick around for that as well. But first, I want to go through what you're going to hear, who you're going to hear from, and a little bit about their background. So I just want to start by calling out Luke Stock. He'll be the first one up to present. He was a senior director for our enterprise solutions at Sigma. He has 25 years of experience in data analytics and business intelligence. And he spent the first part of his career with Fortune 500 companies. And then the last decade, he's been at Tableau, servicing as the last left as like a senior director of solution engineering. Before he came over to Sigma last year. And he will speak specifically to spreadsheets and Tableau's proprietary VizQL. Our second presenter will be Kush Gill. He brings about a decade of experience of hands-on in the analytics and BI with time both at Tableau and at IBM. And he became recognized as a speaker, leading workshops and serving as a Tableau doctor. And helped a number of customers navigate their challenges while at Tableau. And he extends that by his passions into academia, where he's taught Tableau at university programs in Canada. We also have Cambria Brown that's going to speak. She's a solution engineer at Sigma Computing and is an expert in data visualization and best practices. She has over a decade of experience in analytics and business intelligence and has been developing Tableau dashboards both as a customer, a partner, as a consultant before joining Sigma. And she'll be focusing on Sigma's speed to solutions. After that, we'll have Ian hop on, and Ian's going to, just as a background into Ian, he helped deploy Tableau to the world's largest jeweler, Signet Jewelers. And at the same time, he was the local Cleveland Tableau user group leader, and he's a 2-time speaker at Tableau Conference, which is a very difficult thing to do. And following in very similar footsteps as Kush, has taught Tableau at the University of Akron, and he's spent 2 years at Tableau most recently, working with America's, or really the global leaders in retail and in North America. Last up, or second to last, as I should say, the penultimate speaker. By the way, Ian's going to speak to write-back functionality, which is an interesting function and feature to sort of speak to across these platforms. And then Anthony is going to come on, and he has really had a number of different roles, but is passionate about helping organizations scale out how they work with analytics and applying best practices, governance, enablement. And he's been in the space for more than a decade, with the last 6 directly at Tableau. And he has supported customers from small business to Fortune 10 as they modernize their platforms. And then last up in that presentation will be myself. I've worked with Tableau for the last 12 years. I could go back further when I was reviewing the technology and said no to it even further back than that. I'm a 5-time Tableau visionary and Zen master for my ability, the work that I've done to bring Tableau into a broader community. And I've also written a book on the topic called Tableau Strategies. That said, we got a lot of content to cover. This will go in 8-minute buckets on each topic. Oh, by the way, I'm going to cover off Python and customer support. We've got a lot of content to cover today, so I'm not going to waste any time. We're just going to hop right in and let's actually begin. So the first thing I need to do is stop sharing my screen, and we'll pass it over to Luke.
Fantastic. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay, Luke?
Yep.
Perfect. And you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Luke. First off, just want to come out and make it clear that I do love Tableau. I started using it in 2007, which was version 3 at the time. And honestly, it was a fantastic tool for me in my career when all the data was on premises and there was no such thing as like Snowflake or Databricks. Just cloud warehouses weren't a thing then. Well, fun fact, I've actually known Tableau longer than my wife. As Luke mentioned, I was actually a customer for 5 years. And then I worked for Tableau for 10 years before I left to come over to Sigma a little over a year ago. But as I mentioned, things have changed in a major way, and there's a huge opportunity to work with data at a scale I honestly could have never imagined in 2007. And that data is now in the cloud with the likes of Snowflake, Databricks, Redshift, BigQuery. So I'm going to spend a few minutes today talking about languages. So imagine if I told you you had to learn Mandarin Chinese in order to become more effective at analyzing and presenting data. Literally, learn Mandarin Chinese. As you let that sit, you're probably thinking to yourself, you know, in order to gain any level of proficiency learning a new language like Mandarin, I'd have to spend probably hundreds, if not thousands of hours learning and practicing that language. And to be honest, like Tableau's not that much different from that analogy. They have a proprietary visual query language that was born out of Stanford as a research project called Project Polaris. Go ahead and Google it if you'd like. It's down in the bottom, Stanford Project Polaris, and you'll find the papers on the website to this day. Now, this language was a computer science breakthrough because you could describe almost any regular chart type using this visual query language like a bar, a line, a scatter, but not so much the harder ones like Sankey or waterfall or even donut. And just like any language, it has its kind of nouns, verbs, adjectives, pronouns, etc. The VizQL language has rows, columns, marks, filters, pages, and of course, measures and dimensions that can be either discrete or continuous, and that gets a little confusing for the newbie. So naturally, because of the steep learning curve, large enterprises tend to have only a handful of quote unquote Tableau experts because of the amount of time it takes to achieve a high level of proficiency. What I love about Sigma is that what we're doing is addressing that long tail of less technical users who do not have thousands of hours to learn a new language. We're starting off in the love language that all business users started speaking probably all the way back to their middle school days, the language of spreadsheets. So allow me to show you just a quick demo of what this looks like in Sigma. So I'm connected to a Snowflake warehouse, and this is a table of data actually behind the scenes. I'm joining about 5 different tables, but to the lay user, it just looks like a spreadsheet from the get-go. I can see all of my data. It's not a blank canvas. I can scroll. It's in a browser. There's no desktop client. And let's just start doing a quick analysis the way that a spreadsheet user would actually want to do an analysis. And the first thing that they might do is add a new column and just take their sales amount, multiply by the quantity, and boom, I have my total sales. And then from here, I'm going to start to do some things that would be natural, like grouping different data together. So I'm going to take my product type and create a grouping, and I'll do that for my product name as well. I'll create another grouping there. And that total sales that I created, I'm going to add the sum of that at both of the levels of the product name and the product type. And as I collapse this, we'll see the data in aggregate in Sigma, right? And it works the way that a spreadsheet person would actually want to analyze data. Now, let's do something a little bit more interesting. What if I wanted to look at the percent of total sales by product name compared to the product type? Well, in Sigma, it's as simple as adding a new column and taking the sum of the sales at this level, dividing it by the higher level, the product type, and boom, I've got that calculation. I change it to percentage, and maybe I can sort it as well. Very natural. Okay, so what I've effectively done is a rather complex thing if you were to learn this in Tableau. It's a level of detail calculation. And of course, I can naturally condition this table so I can see it with data bars. So boom, I already have, a table visualization in Sigma. And of course, if I wanted to create a bar chart off of this or some sort of visualization, I can certainly do that. I'll just take that calculation and I'll just take my product name and whabam, I've got a bar chart. So as you can see just in this little vignette demo, Sigma is the language of spreadsheets. You don't have to ask your business users to learn anything new. It works the way that they're already thinking of working with data. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Luke. Thanks for the time.
Yes, thanks, Luke, for that. I will move on to Kush.
Awesome. Thanks, Luke. Just let me know when you can see my screen here.
Yeah, you're good to go.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me for this little session on extracts and performance. This was probably one of the categories of Tableau that myself and a lot of people struggled with, especially with large-scale data sets in the hundreds of millions or even billions of rows. And I find it really refreshing how Sigma really handles this well. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. For me, speed isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity, especially when you're talking about making decisions really quickly. And to start, we're going to start talking about extracts. And when I say extracts, we're actually going to talk about ending extracts. And that's because if you have a cloud data warehouse today, you bought it because you wanted speed, scale, and security, right? Just Snowflake, Databricks, other cloud data warehouses that are really good at this. And it's only possible because it's in the cloud and you're able to do things like auto-scaling, clustering, and all the innovation that came with the cloud data warehouses, as opposed to the traditional on-prem database world. There's been a giant leap in innovation from on-premise data warehouses like Hadoop to cloud data warehouses like Snowflake. And quite frankly, the BI tools just haven't caught up to that level of innovation. And if you find yourself still extracting data outside of your cloud data warehouse, that's probably the biggest symptom of that lacking of innovation. If you are extracting data outside of your cloud data warehouse into Tableau extracts, you should be asking yourself, why do you aggregate data in extracts and lose all of that fine-grained insights? Why are you managing hundreds of extracts that are just littered around your server? And why do you have to rebuild security and governance in the Tableau layer as opposed to leveraging what you've already put in place in the cloud data warehouse? The answer to that is you've probably bought Tableau before you got a cloud data warehouse, and now you're dealing with all these inefficiencies that come to light. And this is where Sigma really comes into play, because Sigma was built on the cloud for the cloud. It only live queries the data. We don't have to export anything out into Sigma, and we get to leverage the security and governance you've already put into place. If I asked some of the Tableau users a question here, and feel free to type into the chat, if you had a 1 billion record data set and you were trying to work with it really quickly in Tableau, what's probably the first thing that you would run into? The answer is probably a loading screen that looks like this, where you're just sitting, you're waiting, and you're just watching the wheel spin, hoping your data loads so you can go into the next level of granularity, insight, creating visualizations, pivoting, grouping, calculations, all that stuff that you want to do with the data. You have this large data set, you're really excited to dive in, but then you're limited by the constraints of that tool, which doesn't let you work with it as fast as you want. So today what we're going to do is we're going to show you how we can work with large data sets really quickly and avoid running into errors like these anytime you want to do something exciting. So let's jump into Sigma, where you can see I have this stock history table inside of my workbook. It's about 40 million records. And that's the first point I want to call out is no matter how big your data is inside your cloud data warehouse, that's what you're able to work with in Sigma. We don't have to roll it up into different levels just to shrink the size to make it performant. We don't have to split up the data in chunks. We're not limited to just looking at the last couple of years of data, but we could look at all of the data at once. Luke showed you how quickly you can do calculations. And the great thing is that I can actually now start doing what I want to do. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a pivot table. I want to look at the sector and the volume per sector, right? So it's really easy to start with all that data and then start aggregating it into the views that you want to look at. From here, we're able to see that it looks like the industrials has the highest volume, and this is where I want to dive into further. When you do aggregate and heavily roll up the data, you lose the granular insights, and that means that you can't drill down into the finest grain of data that you have. But in Sigma, because I do have all that data available, I can just start drilling into any level that I want. So let's take a look at how this volume breaks out into each specific industry. I can see that electrical equipment and parts has the highest volume, and this is where I want to drill down into another granular layer, and we'll go ahead and look at how this breaks out by the symbol. From here, it looks like there's a certain stock ticker, blue.pa, that's responsible for a lot of that volume. And I don't have to stop here. I can even go down to the transaction level to every day that stock was traded into the finest grain of that table to get a particular insight. And as I scroll through the pivot table, we can see that it's actually going to be a couple days of volume in the year that are responsible for that big uptick that we're seeing in volume at the sector level. So very quickly, me as a user, I get all of the data. I get really fast performance. There's no loading or error messages where I'm just sitting waiting for the insights, but I can actually dive right in. I can slice and dice. I can go up, down, left, right. I can get anywhere I need to in that data all by myself. And you only get this kind of power when you're a platform like Sigma that's built for the cloud, on the cloud, and actually leveraging the cloud data warehouse for what it's intended for. With that, I'll pass it back over to you, Luke.
Yeah. Before we move on, could you show where there was a question that came from the chat, and the one question was, what's the underlying language behind this? It's SQL, and you actually have access to the SQL. And could you just show right where that is?
Yeah, that's right. Every click that I was making inside of Sigma so far, behind the scenes, what we're doing is we're writing SQL and we're optimizing it for the cloud data warehouse that you're connected to, and we're actually giving you full transparency on exactly what's going on. So even though I did a couple of clicks behind the scenes, Sigma is writing hundreds of lines of SQL for me.
Thanks, Kush. With that, I believe we're going to move on to Cambria. And you're good to go.
All right, awesome. Hi, everyone. Cambria Brown. Prior to joining Sigma, I spent several years as a consultant designing and developing dashboards. And one of the things that really frustrated me was the amount of time and effort that me and my colleagues had to put into gathering advanced technical capabilities, gathering requirements to build dashboards that ultimately ended up getting exported into Excel for people to do their own ad hoc data exploration. So one of the many reasons why I kind of am in love with Sigma now, which don't get me wrong, I was in love with Tableau for many, many years. It's an amazing tool. But one of the reasons that I am at Sigma is because I wholeheartedly believe that data should be for everyone. So what I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to build, oh, hold on, sorry. There's a little bit of lag in the display. I wanted to make sure it was working. So I'm going to build this dashboard in about 6 minutes. This is actually a pretty complex dashboard. Our KPIs are showing how we're doing month over month, as well as the same, comparing that month to the prior year. We have this nice bar chart here that is showing our change in revenue for year to date versus prior year to date. We also, on our quantity by city bar chart, have this nice top-in filter. And down at the bottom, I am showing the revenue for each cuisine percent of total revenue that cuisine represents, as well as within each cuisine, the individual menu items, the revenue for that menu item, and the percent contribution of that menu item within that cuisine type. This is pretty complicated, and I'm going to show you how I can build this in about 6 minutes in Sigma. So starting with this source data, which I want to point out is about 50 million rows of data live from Snowflake, let's go ahead and start building. I'll start with these KPIs that are going to show me my revenue over time. Let's go ahead and truncate this down to the month level, as well as add our comparison to look at this year, to the month of this year compared to the same month of the prior year. Beautiful. Let me go ahead and now duplicate this and modify it just slightly to get the same thing for quantity. All right, so there's our KPI charts. Next, I'm going to add my bar chart that is going to show us our quantity for each city. Let me go ahead and reorient this and sort it. And this is kind of a lot of cities. So I want to make a top-in filter available to my end users so that they don't have to view the entire list. I can easily do that with Sigma's out-of-the-box functionality by simply adding a filter and changing the filter type to a top-in. Let me also pop this out as a page control so it's available to my end users. I didn't have to create a parameter or write any calculations. These common types of things like top-in filters, Sigma just builds them directly into the tool and saves substantial amounts of time. Great. So next on the list is I want to look at my year-to-date versus prior year-to-date revenue for each of my food truck brands. So let's go ahead and do that. I think I'm really going to blow your mind with this one because I'm not going to need to write a single calculation in order to look at the year-to-date versus prior year-to-date. I'm actually going to be able to use Sigma's out-of-the-box UI to simply say, okay, how are we doing this year-to-date versus the prior year-to-date? And I'll hit done. When I do that, Sigma actually wrote some very complex date calculations behind the scenes, but I don't have to worry about that logic at all. Awesome. Let's go ahead and add our truck brand name to our group by so we can see these year-to-date versus prior year-to-date differences for each of our individual food trucks. And I will go ahead and build a visualization off of this as well so that we can get for each of our brands, we'll look at that 1 year delta. I also want to add some formatting here so that any of my negative deltas are highlighted in a nice red color. So I can easily, within the UI again, just kind of say, hey, if my 1 year delta is less than 0, let's make it a nice bright orange. Great. All right, so I'm going to move this down below to the right spot. And I'm about 3 minutes in. So plenty of time left to do that grouping table that you saw at the bottom, which is actually going to be a little familiar because Luke's talk also showed something very similar. So let me go ahead and take my data. We'll create a table. I'll simply group by cuisine to go ahead and get my cuisine level revenue. Wonderful. Now to get percent of total revenue for each cuisine, I'll simply add a new column, take my cuisine level revenue, and divide by my grand total of all of the revenue. I do want to point out that this is the very first time my fingers have touched the keyboard to write a calculation. I was able to do the KPI chart with the time period comparisons, as well as my year-to-date versus prior year-to-date comparisons without writing a single calculation. So here's my percent of total for each cuisine. Now I also want to look at my revenue for each of my menu items. So let me go ahead and group by menu item as well. Expand one of these cuisines so we can better see what's going on. And then I will go ahead and get my menu item revenue. And lastly, I'll just add one more column to get the percent contribution of each menu item within each cuisine type. So very instinctively, all I need to do is divide those columns by each other. And here's my percent contribution. Let's go ahead and polish this off with some sorting and some nice conditional formatting. I can very easily add different conditional formatting to my different columns. For instance, here's my color scale on my percent contribution, as well as we'll add some data bars for our actual revenue. Color scale, clicking wrong here, of course. All right, data bars for our actual revenue. There we go. Okay, beautiful. So let me just drag this down below my other charts. Let's trim any unnecessary space. And there you go. That is my 6-minute Sigma dashboard. I am done developing, but I'm not done showing you the power of Sigma. Let me go ahead and publish this and show you what this looks like to the end user. So I was able to build this in 6 minutes, but my end user has additional capabilities that I didn't have to build at all. So for instance, with our drill anywhere that we've shown already in this webinar, I can drill down on New York City, for instance, into any of the fields in this data set. I didn't have to spend a bunch of time gathering requirements and figuring out all my drill paths that my end user might want. Out of the box, they're able to choose their own adventure and get those next level insights as needed. Also, they can expand any of these charts to reveal the underlying data and do additional analysis here as well without me building anything into the tool. This is just out of the box Sigma functionality. All right. In my last 30 seconds, I'm just briefly going to contrast this with what would have been required to build something similar in Tableau. I would have had to spend a substantial amount of time gathering the technical expertise to build these complex things like LOD calculations and parameter actions. And I would have had to spend a lot of time, again, gathering those business requirements and doing iterations to make sure these dashboards met my business users' needs. So that's my speed to solutions. And I'll just leave you with one final note that with Sigma, data really can be for everyone. Thank you all so much.
Cambria, awesome work. If you could bring up your screen, I'm going to throw a loop in here as we get Ian staged up.
Sounds good.
There's one feature I love because I saw that you were building basically on top of other charts. Could you just show off the lineage view that we have? I think that's a new concept if you're coming over from Tableau, is that you only work with a single data source. But for Sigma, every element is its own data source.
Yeah, very good question. Or very good point. So if I go to one of these bar charts that I made and I want to view this lineage, I can see all the way back to where this started in Snowflake, my data source. And then also like this is that group table I made with the period over period analysis that's ultimately feeding that bar chart. So absolutely you can view your lineage.
Thank you for hopping in and showcasing that. And thanks for the time. We're going to move on to Ian. Ian is going to be speaking about right back here in a few seconds. It's, I would just say, an awesome feature that I wish I had many times when I was working in Tableau.
Awesome. Thank you, Luke. Yeah, you're right. This feature is awesome. And it's hard to do it justice, right, and talking about it in just 7 minutes, but I'll do my best. So it goes without saying, Luke kind of walked through my bio. I certainly wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for Tableau and what their technology afforded to me. And to say I was in my element or comfort zone while working at Tableau is an understatement, right? And I needed to understand Sigma before leaving Tableau and what I was used to move to a relatively new but promising technology in the space, right? Immediately when I connected to data, I said I got it. But there was one feature in particular, which is input tables, commonly referred to as native write-back technology, that like blew my mind and said the use cases that Sigma can be applied to is truly infinite. And it's going to change the way that organizations work with data. So for those not familiar, that write back technology is our ability to instantly write data back to your data warehouse and change values, add values, remove values, and delete values. Now, I, like many on this call, and I'm sure on this panel, remember the first time that we were introduced to Tableau. So I was an aspiring junior analyst in Akron, Ohio, working on my probably Monday morning Excel report that I did each and every week, with the hopes of finishing it early, right? So that I could start on my Tuesday morning Excel reporting. And I was fortunate enough that an individual by the name of Gary Gruccio, a mentor of mine, walked by and said, "Hey, Ian, I got an extra Tableau license. Do you want it? I see you in Excel all day long." And didn't know who Gary was at the time, certainly didn't know what Tableau was, but of course, junior analyst aspiring to do better things. I said, yes, give me that license. So about a half dozen YouTube videos and Tableau white papers later, and a few naps, because we all know you can't read a Tableau white paper without falling asleep, I built my first Tableau dashboard, right? And I had a great sense of accomplishment, right? Time was 2013. We connected to data. I made a beautiful visualization as a non-technical user, and it changed the way that I was going to work with data in my organization. Now, fast forward a few weeks later, I put together my first end-to-end process inside of Tableau. It was called our construction schedule, where I would collect about a dozen or so Excel documents from all the different project managers that were in charge of all the dates and milestones associated with opening up new brick and mortar locations. So think about, when do I start construction? When do the general contractors come on site? When do I get my architectural drawings? And I summarized all that together into a report in Tableau that I gave back to leadership. And it was so helpful that I did it every single Monday. People input data to Excel, they sent it to me, I aggregated it up, and I built those visualizations. That leadership said, we need a more production way of doing this. Inputting data inside of Excel is not a long-term strategy to connecting that information. So they invested in a new technology. At the time, it was called Tango. Purpose-built to collect data where people could input leasing information, their construction information, into a single source of truth that they could then connect to, right? But the problem with that is it costs millions of dollars. When I say that again, they spent millions of dollars to build a custom application to input data into a system. The funny part is you're paying twice, right? You pay for the application, but if you need the data out, that data doesn't go to you, it goes to that provider. So we ported that into our system to report back into Tableau, right? Now, it's not Tableau's fault, right? Tableau was, it was amazing for the time. They could never have guessed where cloud technology was going to go. So Tableau it's read-only. So all the work that we did, we would visualize it, interact with it, but then what customers started doing is swivel chairing to other applications. And there's a lot of reasons why Tableau doesn't have write back yet. The architecture, right? They're live, they're extract. If I'm changing data in a live warehouse, but my data is extracted, you're going to have a mismatch in time periods. They have too many connectors, right? It's just cost prohibitive to build that technology for every single one of their connectors. And I'm sure there's a few people on this call that say, but Ian, what about write back extensions? And to that, my go-to line is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So if anyone has worked with those extensions, they're clunky. They do as advertised, but they're a separate application, right? So you have to have separate hardware to manage it, separate authentication, authorization, all that good stuff that goes along with that. So you're paying for it. And because you have to swivel chair between Tableau and those write back technologies, it's not the best end user experience. Now, contrast that with Sigma. Because of our unique architecture, we have not only the ability to read from our cloud warehouse, but actually write back instantly to the cloud. And that's what users do, right? People that have Tableau, they're looking at Tableau to get their information. They find an anomaly. But if they want to take action on that, they have to pivot over to a source system like a Salesforce, an Anaplan, a Workday, a Smartsheet. The list goes on. Now, I'm sure several people are here saying, Ian, just because you have write back, there's no way you can take on these behemoth companies like a Salesforce, like a Smartsheet, like an Anaplan. And I'm here to say, not only are customers doing that and chipping away at that, but they're actually doing that today, right? But for many on the call that are new to Sigma, I would never encourage you guys to jump headfirst, although you could. It's more like dipping your toes in the water. I'm sure every organization here already has some applications or processes going on in Excel. Those are perfect use cases to say, if we want to productionize that in a more standard, secure, scalable solution, instead of passing that Excel sheet around the organization, let's put it in our cloud warehouse, have Sigma as the front end that people can then interact with that data. Now, of course, I'm not going to come here and just show you a couple GIFs, although they are pretty fancy GIFs. So I want to showcase a couple examples of what this could look like. So this is an embedded Sigma report done by one of our amazing partners, Aimpoint Digital. I was actually talking to the individual that built this just last week, and he said he put this together in just a few days. He knew of Sigma a little bit, played around with it, but he was blown away with how fast he could build something like this. So you could imagine yourself as a supplier, an external partner to your company, and I want to come in and look at all of my orders. So I can come in and, of course, sort through them, or looking at all of my back-ordered orders. And it's potential that all of these orders have an SLA. If I don't get it in time, I don't need the product anymore. So directly inside of the Sigma application, I can open up one of those orders. I can see the information around it. And if need be, I can actually update the quantity directly in the tool. So maybe change it from 15. You know what? I don't need those anymore. Change it to 0, hit save. And I immediately just wrote that back to my cloud warehouse. Other examples that we see quite frequently are demand planning, any kind of forecast that your organization might be doing. A great use case, I actually put this together in my first week here at Sigma, just took a couple hours. And my users can now come in here, get diagnostics, how am I doing this year and last year. I can edit that data by changing type of an input, whether I want to do just a fixed dollar amount or a percent to the prior year. Can input, what do I want to do with that? Maybe I want to change it to 2.8. Quickly hit enter. I updated my forecast. You can see the visualizations down below beginning to load and change. Input my comments. I can submit it for approval. I can then have my approver approve it, which would then lock it down. And oh, by the way, we keep record of every single change that every single user makes, getting an entire audit history of that product. So I'm sure you guys can relate just how powerful something like this is. It's really stretching our ability to be not just a BI player, but an application player, which is why, going back to my original comment, Pandora's box of all the use cases that you can make with this. Now, I'd be remiss to say if I didn't touch on all the buzz that's going on with Tableau Pulse. So what's the Pulse with Pulse, and kind of what's our stance on that? So I actually think it's really great technology if they can get it to the place that they say it's going to go, right? And they have a lot of challenges with that, right? The algorithm. How do I make sure that I'm only getting bullet points or anomalies that are relevant? I'm not having to sift through 100 different ones to find that one anomaly detection or that one story in Pulse that's relevant to me. Of course, data modeling on the front end and then the compute that goes along with it. But what I will leave you guys with regarding Tableau Pulse is once you find that insight, what are your users going to do with it? Probably one of two things, right? The first, either take action on it, again, swivel chair to that application where they need to input that data, or two, understand what's causing that story and drill into not just a handful of records, but the millions or potentially billions of records that Kush previously showcased. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, just the tip of the iceberg and what's possible with write back technology. But I appreciate the time with you guys today.
Thank you, Ian. Anthony, as you're queuing up, Ian, we have a question that came through. How does Sigma handle the lineage of the write back, being sort of like how, as the data changes, how does Sigma handle that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we won't allow you to overwrite production data, but what we do allow you to do is reference production data, which is how you saw I brought in TY sales and LY sales. In terms of monitoring all the adjustments that we're writing back, in the back end of your system, we actually just keep a long running total of every single change and union it back on or tag it on or append at the end. But when we showcase it, we're just showing the most up-to-date comments or changes that you've made.
Thanks for that, Ian. Anthony, if you want to go ahead and get queued up. Perfect. All right. And
Absolutely.
to speak to, if I believe correct, migrations, which I've seen some questions come up around, and I'm blanking on the other topic.
Version control.
Yes.
So,
love that.
yeah, here to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk a little bit about what migrations look like, especially moving to the cloud as a whole in Tableau and in Sigma. Talk a little bit about our approach there. And then I also want to talk a little bit about how we handle workbook versioning, because both of these things are questions I've had come up many times before. I think it's something that we all know that we have to plan around. And I want to talk a little bit here about what that migration path looks like if you're starting from Tableau Cloud, or if you're going from Tableau on-prem to Tableau Cloud. I think, like many of you probably have a preferred project management tool. So as we kind of go through this, just think a little bit about the planning that's required here, because the first step you'll take in migrating, if you're going from Tableau Server to Tableau Cloud, is you'll need to take a moment to kind of understand the differences in terms of the capabilities here. I'm going to highlight it here on this table. Some of the things that stand out in terms of how you might be thinking today about sites is going to be different than how it would be in the cloud environment. Connectivity is different, user management's different. And once you've kind of started to map out those capabilities and those changes, the next step that's recommended is to complete the Tableau Cloud Migration Technical Readiness Assessment. This is actually a custom workbook that you use in order to understand how many different data sources, users, and workbooks and the dependencies that exist between all of those. This is actually something you have to do multiple times. So if we're thinking about kind of our project planner on this migration process, we've probably started to add a few line items. We've probably started to think about what teams we need to assign that to. Because if you've had Tableau for a while, you've probably started to build up a pretty significant amount of workbooks, data sources, extracts, subscriptions, data preparation flows, all sorts of things you have to be mindful of, because you'll need to go through and you'll need to map all of that out. Once you have that figured out, you'll want to take a moment to trial Tableau Cloud and understand a little bit about the differences. You can deploy to any cloud for Tableau Cloud, so long as it's AWS, and you'll need to be mindful of storage and file size restrictions, extract and subscription limits, some of the limitations and requirements around Tableau prep flows and the resource blocks associated with that, and the concurrency limits around that. All things that you'll need to take into account as you take the data that you collected earlier during the technical readiness assessment and the earlier research that you've done, in order to make certain that you have an effective plan, right, for this migration without reducing any of the internal SLAs you might have to your viewers, to your audience, right? Once you've done that, well, then you're in a position now to plan out and execute your migration from Tableau Server to Tableau Cloud. You have a couple of options. You can kind of choose your own adventure here. You can manually migrate all of that. So literally just opening that up inside of Tableau, saving it to the cloud piece by piece. You can work with a professional support group to do that. And there's many out there that can support you there. Or with the newly released Tableau Migration SDK, you can write an application to migrate all of your content to Tableau Cloud. Now, from the Sigma perspective, it's a little bit different. We are a cloud native application. We have never had an on-prem offering, and we've always been designed from the very start to take advantage of the investments that exist across your entire cloud infrastructure. As you already know, if you're investing in a cloud data warehouse, you're likely invested into cloud data handling processes, right? ELT, ETL, things like that. So migrating to the cloud with Sigma is pretty straightforward. You set up Sigma for your organization and deploy to your public cloud of choice. We support AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud today. And then once you have your deployment stood up, you connect directly from your browser to your cloud data warehouses. You can build from there, and any of the capabilities and the governance layers that you've built into your cloud data warehouse, the permissioning, role assignments, all of that is inherited by Sigma. Many of the organizations I work with, they've made significant efforts and investment in setting up roles inside of Snowflake to make data accessible to all users. They want to utilize authentication technologies like OAuth to take advantage of that, and we support that so that it's really for your end users, just a button click, and they're able to get in and work. At the same time, the larger organization here at Sigma, both here in the customer success org and the folks from our sales engineering teams, are here to help your team be enabled, help your users be enabled on how to make that transition and how to use Sigma effectively, coming from a Tableau background so that you can build quickly. I mention all of this because what we really want to help you do is keep the cloud simple and easy. And let me just kind of share an example of that around how we manage versioning in Sigma. There's many different ways to do it in Tableau, right? You can maintain separate copies of workbooks, and you can use that to govern access to different data sources that your workbooks are built from. And you can manage those copies across sites or servers. You can handle that through permissioning and setting up folders and making certain that your users are restricted to the correct areas of visibility, move people in and out of UAT folders or development folders as needed, and make certain you have a process in place, right, to manage all of those revisions. Have designated users who are responsible for handling the review and promotion of workbooks, right? There's a whole framework that you can design there. It's a little bit simpler in Sigma. You just create your workbook. You apply tags to different versions of that workbook. And you can even swap data sources when you do that. And then you simply decide what teams of users in your organization can see that. So let me show you what that looks like here really quickly. And I'll jump over and show you this workbook that I have here. So this is a simple one. I just wanted to create this for our example here today. This is what it looks like today, just a simple published version. I'm going to go in and really quickly, I'm going to tag this particular version as the development version of my workbook. And when I do that, I can choose the tag I want to apply. I can decide if we need to change anything about the data sources, and I'll set that tag on this version. So now in my workbook here, if I want to see the development version that I have, I can just click on that. And if I click on my version history, I can actually see all the way back to when I first created this workbook, the full history of every change I've ever made. I can even name those changes. So for example, this very first change, we'll call that version 1. This change I just tagged as our development version. Well, I'm going to rename that, and I'm going to call that development starting point, just for the heck of it. So I'll go in, I'll save that. But then maybe I make some more changes to this. So I'll go back into editing it, and maybe what I found out during development was, well, this particular control here, we actually don't want to have that. So we'll remove that, and we'll change this text here. We'll call this the published version of the workbook. And at the same time, as I'm moving this workbook into being ready to be used as a final and authoritative source of truth across my organization, I'm also going to change my data sources here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here, tag this workbook. We're going to tag that with a production tag, and we're going to swap the data sources at the same time. And so we can see the original data source that I'm using for my workbook here. And you could have multiple of these. I just have one in this particular example. And I'll go in and I'll modify that. I'll make certain that I'm in the right place. Got the right schema selected here, and the right table. I'll actually go back out here, click on retail, and we'll swap that and tag that really quickly here. So this is a completely different data source, but it's also all in the same document. So this is really helpful, right? Because I can go from my production version, my development version, the version that I'm currently editing in, and I can see that full version history and where I've applied those tags. Now, not only can I do that, but from the end user perspective, let me show you what that would look like for them. Because in my workspace here where I'm reporting and I'm allowing people to see this, I've set it up so that my team of viewers, my end users and consumers, only see the production tag. So very quickly, I'll show you what that looks like from their perspective. They might navigate into that workspace, and when they open up the reporting center and they open up that workbook, this is the only version of it they see. They see that final, ready to publish version hooked up to the correct data sources with all of our final revisions. So it's really just meant to make that a lot easier, and it's one of my favorite things about Sigma because it simplifies so much of the development and life cycle around workbooks. I appreciate the time here. Luke, I didn't know if there's any questions that I could answer.
We did have a few come through, but I think that they have been answered. Apologies if I've missed them. I've been trying to catch them, but I think we're good, Anthony. Thank you for presenting, and I think it's now my chance to wrap things up roughly here. It'll just take me a minute to get my slides back up. And hopefully you all can see my screen. I see it, so I think we're good to go. I'll just say, as I open this up, I look back to my own history of what I did in my career, and there's two things that stood out. 15 years ago, I was a statistician, which eventually became a data scientist title, and I was building solutions, and they weren't really getting utilized, and that's when originally how I started using Tableau. But one of the hard things about that was that we really had to separate the work that was being done by the data science team with the rest of the business who was utilizing Tableau. So that was sort of one of the big problems. I want to go into that a little bit and how Sigma supports Python and compare and contrast the two platforms. But then the other big thing is that not too long ago, I had my own consultancy, and a lot of that had to do with how to support Tableau and the challenges around that. And so for me, those resonated the most, and why I wanted to speak to those here today. So first up, we'll just chat through the world of really data science integrations. And there's a couple ways to do this in Tableau, but the primary way is when you're going to set up your Python server, you have to download Python to a separate machine, which is totally all right. That's actually not too difficult, even though it might sound difficult. You install TabPy, also a generally seamless approach. It's a Python package that you can set up, and you launch that on the machine. Again, all these are small steps that, as a data scientist, aren't particularly hard to do. But you run into this last step, which is you've got to figure out how to connect that Python machine to Tableau server, or even better, Tableau desktop. And this just requires a little bit more customization and really understanding of the platform. If you sort of go, there's plenty of posts that exist in the Tableau forums around how do I do this? It doesn't really work. And you can actually see the feedback here, like, oh, you just follow this blog, and the response is like, oh, well, it just doesn't work. And that's because this feature is very rarely used because it's really difficult to work with. So you'd set this up, but that would allow you to build like a function. And you have to be able to understand what you're doing in those functions in order for them to work. I bring this example up. It's an example of basically being able to, I believe, rank order some items, not rank order, take the log, and then if it is NA, apply it to be a 0. But you have to know first which function you're going to call. So that is going to be script underscore, then either real, int, or depending on basically what you're going to output. Not exactly easy. Then inside of quotes, you're going to write the Python function, which doesn't make life necessarily particularly easy because you have to put it in. And you have to put in things like underscore arg1, which is code that says, hey, in Tableau, I'm going to need to go find something, in this case, sales, and bring that value in. And then Tableau is going to run this function on your visualization dependent on this aggregation. It always has to be an aggregation. So there's another little small challenge of working with this script. So it's not particularly easy. And if I were to just sort of summarize side by side the two, you would be going, all right, in Sigma, you will be able to do that from a container service on your cloud data warehouse, or just install as an app directly on Snowflake, versus setting that up. And what you get in Tableau when you write that function is you get a single column. With Sigma, you return that entire new data source that you can operate on top of. Where Tableau, I showed off that it works on an aggregate on the viz. So whatever your level of aggregation is on your visualization, that's where Tableau is going to run that Python function. In Sigma, it operates at the detail of the data. So whatever the level of grain you have, that's what it's going to showcase. If you get an error, Sigma will show you that error just like it as if it were running in Python, in like a Python notebook. And in Tableau, it just breaks and you don't get a great sense of what's happening there. I'm going to pick up my pace here, just looking at the time and being respectful. I just want to show Python in action really quick, and I recorded it just to be safe. And what I'm going to do is just fit a cluster analysis here. and I'm just pasting that in, and you'll see it says I'm going to fit 4 clusters. You can sort of see the cell-like interface that we have that makes it very familiar if you're a Python user and you're writing that code. So I'm going to run and fit clusters on this data where I basically have products that have distinct number of customers and the average orders and the total revenue. And I'll make a scatter plot really quickly. And apologies for the cut here. You're not actually seeing me do the work, but just know that I'm building that scatter plot. And now I'm going to just quickly apply the output of that cluster analysis directly on my viz so that you can see and pop through. Yep, there it is, that clustering algorithm that we have applied. So if you just sort of take a look back, we started with a table. We ran on top of that table a Python script and then outputted that scatter plot from it. So just wanted to bring that up and call out how that looks in Sigma versus Tableau. All right. If I were to end on any topics really quickly, is Tableau's customer support. If you're a Tableau customer, you can pay for premium support. That is something you certainly can do. And I just have a little GIF that runs here, and it goes to their webpage, and you can find that premium support and what it comes with. And one of those things that it comes with is basically support to resolve your bugs faster, but you have to pay for that. And I would just say, like, and this is a known challenge of working with Tableau, is that its support is sort of a headache. And if you go look at Gartner Peer Insights, a reputable source for reviews, the dislikes are pretty consistent. It's service, it's support. The same challenges. Even if you look at the Magic Quadrant in previous years, same thing pops up. You can find this directly in Reddit, where support is another challenge, or even directly in Tableau's own forums, where they would prefer something like live chat, where 11 years ago someone submitted the request, could we do live chat? That would be way easier. Let's talk about Sigma customer support. By the way, the time to close tickets, well known in the consulting world, is like months on end, and that's why you bring in consultants so that you can get those resolved faster. And by the time they're resolved, the problem you've already moved on, because it's months that it takes. So Sigma, our customer support is in the bottom right corner, is a chat, and it's not a bot. It is a chat for a place where you can immediately go chat. These are people. They are working really hard to make sure they solve your problems. Their average response time is 23 seconds, and they resolve that first contact over 85% of the time. So occasionally there's some more complex things that require some support, but the average time you're going to get a response is 23 seconds. Overall, our customers respond, and they give ratings of 4.8 out of 5. So it's like 96% satisfaction rate out of all of it. So when you think about that customer satisfaction, whether you're waiting several months for a response or a few seconds, I think is a huge differentiator when you're really trying to get to the solution in the time you actually need it. Given that we're like right on time, or actually I'm 28 seconds over, I want to do a quick wrap up. And first of all, thank everybody for coming. But what you heard from our panelists were that, one, people love spreadsheets. It is the preferred way to actually work. With Sigma, we don't create extracts because that removes that synchronous work that is required. We showed you how we can build fast with basically 0 clicks on a keyboard. Write back is an awesome functionality that takes your data further. And then we had Anthony showcase version control. And then I think I showed that not only is it for the workers who love to work with spreadsheets, but it's also for the individuals who love to use their technical skills. And then, of course, we'll just wrap that up and say that with Sigma, we recognize that it's not just the technology, that it's about the people supporting it. And that's why I wanted to make sure that we highlight our customer support. That said, we very much appreciate your time with this whole hour hopping on. Thank you again. Oh, there's a question. We'll be shareable playback. Absolutely, there will be some additional resources from this session, including a link to this webinar for all of you as follow-up. So thank you again for the time today.